silence. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States. Terry, roll call.
Mr. Brookhart. Dr. Faulkner.
Here.
Mr. Garman.
Here.
Mr. Hoffman.
Here.
Mr. Reichard.
Here.
Mr. Reichard Jr.
Here.
Mr. Umbriak.
Here.
Mr. Vognetz.
Here.
Dr. Green.
Here. 2-1, public comments, max 3 minutes, agenda item only. Right. 3-1, U.S. News and World Reports.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. You could go, I think, 2 ahead. I had shared this information with the board, but just kind of wanted to remind the board that we've been recognized by U.S. News and World Report as a best high school. Last week, we had an academic pep rally at the high school where the students got to be recognized for this honor. We have a banner now at the high school. They had a big cake and ice cream celebration, and then we went out to the carnival. Thank you so much for the press coverage we got. And you'll also find that banner now on our website. But we were, if you just take a look at the rankings, we are ranked number 56 in Pennsylvania high schools and ranked number 1 in this region here for high schools. And you see the scorecard data there to just know some of the factors that are taken into consideration. So looking at AP results, looking at our Keystone exam results, which students take in algebra and English and biology, and also looking at our graduation rate. So congratulations certainly to our students, our families, our teachers, our administrators at the high school, and honestly throughout the district in that preparation. So excited for them. We'll move then to our assessment calendar, and I'll turn that over to Mr. Moser to talk about our next few slides.
Thank you. Yeah, if we could pull this document up. What you see in this link is a draft calendar for assessments, key assessments throughout the school year for next year. Some of these may change depending upon just conversations with administrators, with building level administrators, conversations with department leads. There may be some adjustments. One thing to note in terms of 3 through 8, we did make a decision in some preliminary conversations to at least put the draft out where one of our criterion referenced tests, which we do in grades 3 through 8, is the CDT, the classroom diagnostic tools. We had been giving that, this current year, we gave that 3 times throughout the school year, alongside of our norm referenced assessments, which we give 3 times as well. One of the things we did do was make the determination to potentially scale back on one of the criterion referenced assessments, so going from 3 to 2 in that. And the reasoning behind that is, number one, a concern for making sure that we're not, getting into proctoring too many assessments, but also the timing and how much time is actually available after that assessment to make any necessary adjustments. Because again, those criterion reference assessments are very specifically aligned to state standardized tests. So if you are doing 3, you have to have the appropriate amount of time in between sessions to actually act upon any of those as teachers. And we looked at the calendar and really thought deeply about whether or not 2 would be sufficient to get the information we need and still have the same amount, still have the appropriate amount of time to actually develop any kind of action plans around that. So as of right now, in grades 3 through 8, we do have, we still have 3 norm reference assessments, which we think are incredibly valuable. One of those we are backing up from where it was this year so that it comes earlier in the school year, which, in some early conversations with building administrators amongst teachers, is that we are bound to get more valid results, more validity in the results if students aren't taking that a week before they leave for summer vacation, which is a very fair piece of feedback. So we're going to give that earlier in May. The only downside to that is it does butt it up closer to the state assessment window. So there is some things to work through in terms of that. At the primary school, you still see the pretty much the same layout in terms of norm reference 3 times per year. I don't know if there are any questions. It's not all that different from what we presented last year. One of the things that I think is really important in this is not only getting the data in our hands, but for those of you who maybe weren't here when we went over this last year, actually having a plan for what we're going to use that data for. And so that third column is actually kind of identifies what professional development day, according to the school calendar, does it best align to? Is this something that will be done on one of those days? Is it something that will be done in departmental time, professional development sessions, so on and so forth? But very proud of the fact that we got data into teachers' hands very, very quickly after whatever assessment was given, so that it wasn't just an assessment that students took and there's no follow-up or follow-through upon that. Instead, we want to make sure that it's very useful for our students and specifically for our teachers to craft instructional planning for their students. So we do pride ourselves on getting the best quick turnaround time on some analysis of that data so that they actually have it in their hands as soon as possible to actually impact instructional planning. I don't know if there are any questions about any of this. So the next section is actually our last norm referenced assessment results across the district. So one of the things, as this is up there, I want to explain some slight differences between grade levels. So we're looking at mathematics right now. So what you would see in K through 2 would be based on iReady, an iReady diagnostic assessment. 3 through 5 would be the MAP assessment, and 6 through 8 back to iReady, and that's just a function of where things were at curriculum-wise throughout this present year. iReady is and MAP are both nationally norm referenced. They give you an approximation of how students score against their peers, and then approximate how that ranks into percentiles, meaning if you're in the 70th percentile, you're doing better than 30% of all students across the country. So this is really, these numbers are nationally normed. The MAP data is probably slightly more, it has a larger sample size, so it's probably more valid and more accurate in that regard. But iReady has a very large sample size as well, and in my past experience with it, paying attention to those percentile ranks does lead to student growth if you're doing the right things with the information regardless. So I think both MAP and iReady, very powerful. Now, what I'd like to pay attention to is there was really a shift this year at the primary school in terms of using, really kind of paying attention to norm reference data for instructional planning purposes. And I have to give a lot of credit to the teachers at DPS in terms of mathematics, in terms of really kind of getting around and understanding and getting their heads wrapped around what that information tells us. Because at the beginning of the year, so you see K1 and 2 at 70, 73, and 63% of students on or above grade level. The first test this school year, that number, K through 2, was 12%. I don't think 58% of students, although there was a lot of great work in moving students, it was probably closer to the mid-year, which was around 38% on grade level. One of those things was truly the data mind shift of saying, because one of the common responses that we heard was, well, they're 5 and 6 years old and they're not going to do well on a computer. Well, the reality is the percentile rankings you see are the same test, the same environments, the same mode for all students across the country.
Right.
So to have 12%, that we knew there was no way that only 12% of our students in K through 2 were on or above grade level. So that was just invalid data from the start. What I think we saw in the second window, and again, kudos to the teachers for really taking it seriously, passing that on to their students, stressing the importance of why we do these so that we know how to best help you and serve you. You can see some fantastic results at the end of the year there in comparison. In terms of 3 through 5, what you find with MAP is that it does not necessarily correlate to a proficiency. It is truly more of a norm reference. They do not offer you a grade level, if you will. It's truly more of a percentile ranking. So that does change those numbers a little bit. For instance, what I would say is I would expect, personally in my own experience and looking at some early information, we would typically see those numbers not necessarily be correlative to PSSAs. They do not tell you they are correlative to PSSAs, nor does iReady. So when we end up seeing achievement results on state standardized tests, those numbers of proficiency and advanced are going to look very different than this, because these are truly percentile ranks based on a norm referenced assessment, whereas when we see those achievement results later on, those are criterion based set by the state. So we're looking at two very different measurements. So I don't want anybody to think it would be very misleading to say that if you looked at 63% and even some of those that have changed, if we were to put a comparison up, you would see that of those 9 grade levels, you would see some significant improvements in approximately 7 of them from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. 2 that remained fairly stagnant. So what we use that for then is, okay, what gaps are not being closed? And then we work with building administrators, work with building teachers to really do some action planning around that. If we go to the next slide, has results for reading. And again, draw your attention, this is the same, one of the things here is K through 2. Again, this is based on DIBELS, which is a norm reference assessment that is really focused on early foundational reading skills. And then 3 through 5 again is MAP. And then 6 through 8 back to iReady. Next year, 3 through 8 will be MAP. So there will be a little bit more consistency in what these numbers are actually meaning and telling us. We just wanted to make sure we got through a sound pilot year with MAP testing before rolling it out across. Again, you can see some very strong numbers. Again, I would not say that these are predictive of PSSA scores. I actually would anticipate our PSSA scores drawing more in reading from the 1 grade below level, if you will. So you'll see proficiency in reading tends to be higher on PSSAs than what the norm reference data tells you, and the inverse is true of math. Math, typically your achievement is not as high as what your percentile rank is, because every state, remember these are nationally normed, every state uses a different test. So it's not a predictor of those types of things. Overall, I would say in reading, again, we saw some strong movement in a lot of areas. There are certainly some areas where we did not see as much growth as what we would have liked. And again, that comes down to a couple of questions. One, did we actually get valid data? And back to the calendar and the conversation around when the last assessment took place, it was butted up near Memorial Day. It was the week prior to Memorial Day weekend, if memory serves me correct off the top of my head. Would we get more valid data? If you've ever been in an elementary school or middle school, it gets a little different late May versus early May. So is it actually valid data that we're looking at here? And we don't have the answer to that, but what we would like to do, we feel as if there may have been across the board in 3 through 8, more growth than what is actually indicated on this assessment. But we have to change a variable there, which is the timing of the assessment for next year. Draw your attention to K through 2 or more levels below. That is significant improvement from the beginning of the year in K through 2 reading. We talked about, basically about 40% entering third grade below grade level based on last year's data coming into this year. And now you can see that number going down as you move through those primary grades. And that's really important if we're going to eventually start seeing more sustained, consistent reading results in the higher grades. K through 2 is imperative to getting it right. And so when we see 9% of kindergartners 2 or more levels below, that's actually below the number of what you would anticipate that would end up receiving special education services or needing tier 3 interventions. Great work across the board. Fortunate enough to be able to communicate with those teachers this week and really kind of dive into that. But if we want to start seeing, anywhere from 5 through 8, those numbers dropping, it starts K through 2. By the time we hit 3rd, 4th grade, it is so much harder to close those gaps that exist. So we want to prevent those gaps from existing in the first place or close them as soon as we start to see them. Any questions, comments, feedback?
What would you expect? What is a healthy distribution that we would expect for this? Is it 70, 20, 10? Is it like, what would you say would be a healthy distribution?
In terms of proficiency?
Yeah.
Typically what you see when you look at most districts is you see a much higher proficiency rate earlier on, and you start to see drops around 3rd grade. And then either 5th or 6th grade, you see a slight drop, but they're not you would expect to see some level of decrease over the years. A healthy district probably in K1-2 would fall between 75 and 80%. I would think in terms of being on grade level, not really needing even strategic supports. And then you would see another 10 to 15% who require some level of strategic supports, and then anywhere from 5 to 10% in a healthy MTSS model needing the tier 3 supports, which would be indicated by the column labeled in red.
Yeah, goal would really be that your results here looked like what an MTSS model would look like, where you're saying like 80% of students can function on or above grade level with what you're implementing in a regular ed environment. And then you've got that 10 to 15% that you hope to get there, but need some interventions, may hit that kind of yellow spot, and then that 5 to 10% that needs something more intensive than that. So like if we're doing it right, that's where you'd hope to be, especially in that K to 2 window.
And we don't really have, this is, in some respects, pilot data. If we look historically, we don't have a great way to compare data 3 years ago.
So at the primary school, they have been using DIBELS for some time, but I think, like Mr. Moser was talking about, there wasn't necessarily an emphasis on like analyze the data, make a plan, pull kids because of that data. And so although it exists, I think that you're right in some ways, this does serve as a pilot year for us.
If there's not engagement in the task, the
correct.
results could be skewed, and then how would you compare a skewed data set to one that
What-
we think could be closer?
And then there's certainly like NWEA literally as a pilot. Like there's
Yeah.
not data before that.
And I would say it's fair to say that in the past, the teachers who really honed in on the DIBELS data were your reading specialists,
Yes.
and they knew it inside and out. Like I don't want to take that away from them, and they paid attention to it, and they crafted their approach through what that data was telling them. One of the changes we made was sort of trying to open that up more so that it's all of us paying attention to every kid, not just those who receive title services.
Yeah.
Reading specialists Mr. Moser's right. We're monitoring that closely. So if we're thinking about sort of that tier 3 group, I would say for years that's been done very well here in terms of monitoring growth at the tier 3 level. We're taking it kind of more into tier 1 and 2 as
Yeah.
well, but certainly would want to shout out their work with it.
While we're on the topic of assessment, we'll go to the next slide and just an update. You have the future of state testing, PSSAs and Keystones. It has been announced by Governor Shapiro that they will all move online mandatorily in the 25-26 school year, which means next year you have the option, which has been in place for several years now, of doing it all online or doing it pencil and paper. In 25-26, we will no longer have that option. That's going to be a big shift for our teachers. Probably not as big of a shift for our students, to be honest, because our students are certainly more digitally native than what we as adults tend to be. If you've ever watched a 5-year-old with a phone or a tablet, you know exactly what I mean. They can navigate those things pretty naturally. But there are some other things that are going along with that. It will lead to a reduction in testing time. They're saying that they're going to develop the questions in such a manner that they're able to extrapolate more information about a student's achievement in fewer, more innovative and types of questions. Yet to be seen what those look like. That's just what we've been told. So it will be interesting to see what those actually look like, and I would anticipate that any impact in terms of achievement results would not be isolated to Danville Area School District or any other school district. Those impacts would likely be seen in a pattern across the state. So again, when we end up looking at achievement in the fall or late summer, we have to keep an eye on cohort rankings within the IU, because it's really the achievement percentages are one piece, but that cohort ranking really tells us whether a group sort of improved, got a little worse, suffered a little bit, or if they've kind of stayed status quo in their growth through the years. One of the things, and I will say our counselors did a fantastic job at every level this year at Liberty Valley, the middle school, and the high school in terms of materials. I mean, they have those systems down. It is like you have to keep tests when they come in, testing materials, under lock and key. If somebody's going to be in the room where they are stored, that person has to sign an assurance. They have to go through a training. I mean, it is like a legit full-time job come when those materials arrive.
Truly is.
I'm like, not even joking.
I think we were sharing with someone that if a student vomits on a test, you literally have bags to put that in, and that test has to be returned.
Yes.
Like, that's how
Does it come by
tight the
armored truck?
count is.
What's
Do
that?
they come by armored truck?
No, they come UPS.
In a cardboard box, then you have to lock it.
But they did a great job. But that is a major endeavor for those counselors who tend to serve as the school assessment coordinators. In some cases, for our administrators who have to help depending upon the situation. And if there is at least one definite positive that comes out of going online, is that becomes so much simpler. Students get a secure login, counselors share that with the test proctor shares it with the students. That's it. One student can log into one machine under one account, and the results are automatically sent. We will certainly, I'm sure, hear some of our teachers say that students are not going to do as well online as they would on paper and pencil. That is yet to be seen from any kind of actual scientific standpoint. We don't have the data or the numbers yet. Again, if that was to be seen here, I would anticipate logically that it would be seen across the state. But no longer is the state nudging us towards online, 25-26, we just are online. So the question becomes, and we have to have these questions over the summer administratively, and then along with, again, those department leads, those building leads and teachers, do we want to make that move next year knowing we are forced into it the following year? And certainly we do not have an answer for that as of yet. I would anticipate that by early August, we will have come to a conclusion that we would like to go forward with.
And certainly the kind of benchmarking data and growth data that we were sharing, those assessments are all done online. So there is some kind of experience that our students have had. And certainly shout out to Mr. Ryan and his team. We're very well prepared from a technology standpoint to pull this off. There are some districts that have a lift to just say, like, would we have the bandwidth for every kid to be taking a test during this testing window? And so I feel certainly very fortunate, and thank you to Mr. Ryan and his team, that that's not a barrier we have to get over as a district. Any questions about that? All right, our next item is just an update about Act 56. So this year, this passed into school code. So historically, Pennsylvania school districts have had to have 180 days of school and 900 hours of instruction at the elementary level and 990 hours of instruction at the secondary level. So you could have more hours than that or more days than that if you wanted, but they were both of the minimums, and you had to hit the day minimum and the hour minimum. With the passing of Act 56, school districts can now have 180 days of instruction or the necessary hours of instruction. And so you could meet the hour requirement with fewer days of school. And that is kind of the state giving districts flexibility around school. So even theoretically, districts could make the number of hours by having like a Monday through Thursday schedule throughout the year, or whatever those kind of cases might be. A simple thing could even be that school districts could start having discussions about, do we have to make up snow days, or how many would we have to do? So wanting to share this because kind of two things that we'd have to navigate as a district if we wanted to. So we have a calendar currently passed to have 180 days of instruction for next year with built-in snow days. The number of hours that we have in a school day put us above the 900 and the 990. And we do have a few days that are early dismissals. It would require board approval to change our calendar. So if we wanted to have an adjustment around snow days, those kinds of things. It would also require some conversation and consideration with the collective bargaining contract, because there's like a required number of days for teachers in there, and how many of those days are teachers with students and how many of those days are teachers for professional development. So wanted to present that information. There's certainly not a change that we have to make, but we could just kind of start conversation about if we wanted to move in any direction there.
What would be the incentive to make the changes? I guess is one of the things I'm curious about.
I think one of those would be financial. That's probably going to be the big one across the state that you're going to see. Beyond that, it could potentially open up some opportunities for collaboration days, some working days within the CBA, where there is more time for those types of things, to discuss student results, to look at those types of things. Not suggesting that. I think we would land in the camp, and I don't want to speak for Dr. Need, but we'd want to be very cautious about being out ahead of this, because I think there could be some real impact on student achievement, and student learning, student growth, because one of the things we know is effective is consistency. In fact, we had a summer school meeting today where we talked about, the students who came in, who are coming in. It is really, the intent behind it is to prevent what we normally see in the summer slide. So I think those conversations are ones to broach very, very carefully. It also has some real ramifications if we were to do something different amongst our community.
Yeah, I would find it hard to advocate for less time with students.
Right.
I'd certainly am open to conversation, but that's not a stance that I'd be excited to take, that we offer less. And I would agree that it has a larger community impact. And those were just kind of the two actual legal things that would even need to happen for us to even go down this path at all. But I'm sharing information because I was asked to share, but we're not taking a stance in which we'd like to reduce the amount of time in school or anything like that at this point.
Do we have any sense of, I guess, what other folks are even considering
So
in relation to this?
I would say locally, the only conversations that have happened at regional superintendents meetings, and I don't think any boards have actually voted to do this yet, but like kind of the most kind of dip your toes in that I've heard districts talk about is to potentially not make up a snow day or two. But nobody's talking about 4-day weeks or shorter school days or,
Right.
you know what I mean, anything that's like a large instructional change.
Well, we currently have that option in place now, don't we?
So we are approved for flexible instruction days, which allow us to go virtual. But we did take the stance this year that we certainly have enough data through COVID to show that learning from home is not as effective as learning in school. So we have made up our snow days. The only time we used a flexible instruction day this year was when there was a water main break here at the high school the day before Christmas. We had high school go virtual only. And you are allowed to use those FID days for like a school at a time for those kind of building emergencies.
I mean, I think most of us firmly believe that the student's time in front of the teacher already isn't enough in some senses. And so to think about seriously taking away some of that doesn't seem like the right move to me.
Time on task with a highly effective teacher is still the only surefire way to ensure student academic growth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and even to consider something like a 4-day school week, I mean, there are big downstream ramifications for people in the community if you were to convert to something like that. Because then you have to, for a lot of people, if they're not in school, there has to be a parent there,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And I think the only places you hear rumblings about something like that would be larger school systems that are maybe having building problems and they become shared teacher, shared building kind of situations. And we're certainly fortunate in Danville that we're not looking at any issues like that to solve.
And to open up more time for additional teacher education and instruction wouldn't be something that I would be adverse to, but I don't really have any interest in reopening the collective bargaining agreement. And the difficulty in getting the union to agree to the amount of time that we added once a week, I think would be an insurmountable task to, at least at this time. So I don't see that it's going to affect us very much.
Yeah, so just to be clear, our calendar right now that's approved for next year has 180 days of instruction, surpasses those hour requirements, and does have built-in snow days. So is a traditional calendar, if you will.
I mean, at least I personally already think that when we shortened the school day, that was probably a mistake, so. Decreasing instructional time.
The only thing I had said about is putting the snow days at the end of the year. So you have like a set schedule that'll never change during the school year. And then if you need them, they're there. If you don't, then you're done. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's the only thing I'd be for.
I mean, I agree with that. Instead of changing the holiday time or taking a Monday or taking a Thursday away from your holiday breaks. I mean, I do agree with that because then people got to
Or the
change.
Williamsburg Fair, we don't need those 2 days either.
Yeah, we don't need 2 days for a Bloomsburg Fair. I mean, we never had that when we were in school.
What would that look like? Like, what would that add up to at the end of the year? 'Cause I know one of the things you mentioned was the summer slide. If we stack a bunch of days at the end, we lengthen the time away from instruction in the summer, theoretically, I guess.
Well, my concern about stacking the days at the end is that there's a difference in the last week of school and the level of instruction my children are receiving
Yeah, it's less.
Yeah.
Yes.
compared to the weeks and months before.
How many snow days do we have this year?
So this year we had 3, I believe, to make up 2 or 3. So we do try to build some in earlier, like Dr. Green
Yeah.
was saying, just because we're trying to get in as many instructional days before like PSSAs
Yeah.
that you can, while also taking into consideration like no break totally went away. If you,
Yeah.
like, so we never did snow day,
Oh, yeah.
and take the whole break away, but I can appreciate that. if we looked at a calendar where they were all at the end too, we'd probably need to make some sort of provision that we were comfortable as a board under Act 56 with our seniors going to school less, because we probably wouldn't want to put a graduation date that was just like pushed way into the future, and then you don't have those snow days and seniors are sitting around for
Yeah.
over a week,
Oh,
like
yeah.
waiting to graduate.
I mean, I understand the concern because we had a trip scheduled and there was a snow day makeup on the day of one of the trips, so I get that.
Yeah.
But, I mean, looking at what my children have done for the past week and a half, I can only imagine if that was extended.
Another week.
Another week, then I'm not sure that would be particularly high yield for them.
Yeah,
So
and
it
I-
would have made much more sense for them to get it in
Yeah.
January, right?
Yeah.
Or in December than it did, at the
Yeah,
end.
I guess the only other way to look at it is nowadays like, when was the last time we had more than 3 or 4 snow days in a year?
Right.
Like,
Yeah,
it's
we've
not
been-
like
I
we're
would
getting,
say-
like,
Yeah.
2
It's not a
weeks
lot
of
of
snow
days.
days, or,
Yeah, I
it's,
hear you.
Yeah, we just build in 5,
Yeah.
thinking that should
yeah,
cover
be plenty.
us, if
Yeah.
you will. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think an important point with Act 56 is it does provide us the flexibility, truly, of if it's one day we have to make up, we could, as a district, make the decision to say, we're not, rather than tax 7.5
'cause you already
hour
have the-
day,
Yeah.
Right.
we
You already
would
have the
not
requirement.
have to do that
Yeah.
according to PA's,
Right.
according to code.
Yeah.
And so there could be a vote to alter the calendar to not make up that particular day or something like that.
So not much effect now, but gives us some flexibility.
Yeah, again, I see regionally the discussion just being sort of flexibility around snow days potentially for people. But
All right.
wanted to just share that information. That will transition us into the finance portion of the meeting, and I'll turn it over to Mike to just talk about our audit update.
Last week, we received our June 30th, 2022 audit from Wagner, Dries, Lasser and Associates. Finally, it's been a long haul. We had a surplus of $1.5 million in that fiscal year. Of that $1.5 million, $709,000 represented operating revenues exceeded our expenditures. The remaining difference was we refinanced some bonds, so we had some revenue on that side. So we had a 1.5 surplus in that fiscal year. You'll see that on the agenda for approval. There was no findings. It was a long process due to staffing issues and so forth, but it's complete. So if you have any questions, don't be afraid to reach out to me. It's in your board packet for next week for approval. Clean audit.
Clean audit, good job.
Annual year-end budget transfer approval?
This is every year we request for permission for the business manager to make the necessary budget transfers. This helps us close the fiscal year for auditing purposes. And what I mean by budget transfers, it could be various departments. Some people spend more in supplies, and hey, we spend it in supplies, we want to shift it from equipment to supplies. So you'll see this at the very end. There'll be it'll be a budget transfer information like Mr. Moser did last month. It's a housekeeping issue. Just some of the areas that we're seeing is our advertising this year. We spent much more than we anticipated, so we'll be taking funds from another area and transferring it into advertising to bring that up to a zero difference in our balance approach. We bought a high school sound system that was under equipment, so we'll take some supply expense and offset our equipment with that. So again, this is just for approval to close the books for 2024 and move on for the audit purpose. Any questions on that? No,
Just housekeeping.
it's housekeeping, correct.
2024-2025 budget approval?
So these are numbers that we looked at last month, but the budget will be up for approval at the June 12th meeting. So we had shared last month that we made an increase of $82,661 to our anticipated revenues. And again, with revenues, we are making our best guess, knowing that the state actually passes their budget after we pass ours. But we're projecting our revenues to be $45,846,768. And then we took a look at our expenditures last month as well. So if you move to the next screen, Mr. Ryan. And so we had started with a projected deficit of $789,000, and we shared some of the cuts in reductions as we kind of tightened up our expenditures. And certainly kudos to Mr. George and just how tightly he maintains the buildings and grounds budget. We were able to make up a lot of ground in that area. So we were able to reduce our expenditures by $202,967. And if you recall, and if you go to the next screen, Mr. Ryan, we did have a recommendation that we could place that money into capital reserve, which is basically a commitment to set aside money for future facilities needs, especially since we're in a time where we're looking at our long-range planning needs as a district. That would put us, if you take a look at the next slide, in a place where we would be recommending a 3.5% tax increase, and then that shows the monthly implications for residents of Montour and Northumberland County. But if you take a look at the next slide, you will see that homestead farmstead funding increased, which does equate to an additional $30 credit in a household. So that is a nice offset of the tax increase that we didn't talk about last time because we got that information in. So wanted to share in terms of tax increase that there was that credit that would be coming to families as well. Questions or comments there?
2024, 2025 tuition rates?
And so we will have on the June 12th agenda approval for the rates. These are the PDE approved rates. So we'll be asking for those to be approved.
Okay.
And, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And then our next item, I'll actually turn back to Mr. Sokolowski to talk about our liability insurance.
Seltzer Group is our broker here at the district, and we'll be asking for approval for our liability, workers' comp, and our cyber insurance policy for next year. In the packet, you'll see what's expiring and what the new rates will be. We'll still stay with Utica National and AmTrust as our workers' compensation, and adding travelers insurance for additional cyber policy for the district. Obviously, insurance rates are going up for everyone, and we've seen the impact also. Workers' comp, we're very good. Our rate is only $4,000 difference, which is excellent these days. Our mod is very low, and the safety committee keeps on track of any issues we're having, so we'll be asking for recommendation to approve the insurance policies for the new fiscal year. Anybody have any questions on that? No?
On to 4-6, transportation for athletics.
So we did put out a request for bids for a contract for athletics as well as one for band and field trips for the next 2 years. You'll see the bids for each of those are attached, so you have them electronically, and we also have them physically for you in your folders if you want to review those. We would love to have there to be some discussion so that on June 12th we could vote to approve a bid. We have shared kind of where the lowest bid came in, but there's certainly lots of things to consider when looking at that. The lowest bid to come in for athletics was from Myers, and the lowest bid to come in for band and field trips came from Fishing Creek. But again, you have those both electronically and physically in your folders. So just looking for what direction we'd like to go in for each of those, and they're 2-year contracts for athletics and a 2-year contract for band and field trips.
So for athletics, there was only one bid, right? So there's only
Correct.
one choice, right?
Yes.
Correct.
So Myers and Sons. But there are 2 choices for the combined contract for band extracurricular trend. And that is a single contract, that is not a dual contract, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
So I'm just going to express a little bit of my concern surrounding Fishing Creek, that I've at least personally had some significant issues with them and the routes they run, at least around my house, both with consistency of the busing, the consistency of the driver and arriving on time. So, you know, I have a little bit of concern from that perspective about their ability to sort of maintain those routes in that fashion, because this is addition above and beyond what they're required to do in order to bus the kids to school on a regular basis, correct?
This is a separate contract, so we do have 3 companies we work with for daily bus runs. This
Okay.
is a separate contract from that, so you're correct.
And just a quick pass over of what I'm looking at here, it looks like their hourly rate is higher than Reichard, but the per mile is lower.
Correct. And then there's a minimum on Mr. Reichert's.
And I hate to ask these kind of questions with some representation of the busing company here, but so with either of those companies, is there any history of having issues of maintaining routes when they've taken above and beyond or extra?
So I did ask Mrs. Reno, our transportation director, this question about, in terms of the extracurricular activities. And there were 6 instances this year where the runs for field trips could not be fulfilled. One of those was a change from our original schedule to a, so that one,
Our fault.
that, kind of, I think it was a rain out. So, you kind of have to deal with that. But there were at least 5 times where those runs were kind of, I guess, subcontracted, if you will, to another company to pick it up,
Okay.
which, is still covering, but is clearly not fulfilling all of the details of the contract that they're saying, that they would agree
And who
to.
was running those routes this year?
Fishing Creek,
It was Fishing Creek.
yes.
Okay. And I guess I don't know if this is the appropriate place to ask this question, but I mean, with looking at the consistency of busing for the normal routes, not within this contract not within the setting of this contract, do we have a way that we look at their reliability and/or?
We would certainly know if like a bus was not able to be run. So it's within the contractor's purview to like change who the driver is.
Right.
But we wouldn't have a concern that they're not like running their routes on a daily basis.
But
if that makes sense.
we don't have any data behind things like consistently arriving on time at the prescribed time or any of those sort of things.
The best we would have is anecdotal.
I mean, because a piece of what I'm seeing here is anecdotal, because I see with, like, my kid, there are times where they were never on time the entire year, and as much as 20 or 30 minutes late to pick up my child. And then there were a few days where they were exactly on time and left before I could get there, because of course I was never there on time, because they were never there on time. And so there's some degree of concern
Sure.
from my perspective. So I guess when I think about this, I'm weighing, there's some differences.
All the factors.
The
sure.
Correct.
customer service aspect,
course.
right?
Correct.
Because at the end of the day, it's not just about
Not just dollars
the
and
lowest
cents.
bid.
Right.
It's about making sure that we're getting what we need from whomever it is that we need something.
All right. I don't know if anyone has additional thoughts. Bueller? Seems oddly appropriate in a school.
It does.
No additional thoughts? I mean, because it seems like from the athletic perspective, we have limited options, right?
Correct.
It is singular.
Yes.
But we're going to have to come up with a decision between the other 2
Yes.
companies.
Correct.
I'm not sure how relevant it is or not, but I mean, I think about part of the thing that's important, of course, is safety. And so I don't know if and safety, I mean, that's a challenging thing because it's like an accident is not necessarily the responsibility of the driver, right? It could be someone else. I'm not even sure if we have data on that sort of stuff or not, but I guess that was something that I was curious about. Like, are there differences in safety-related
I certainly
data?
don't know any historical safety data. I
Yeah.
can say that in the year and a half that I've been in this role, there have been 0 injuries to like a driver or a student. So
Yeah.
anything that's happened with a bus or a van has been in the like fender bender kind of type of
Yep.
situation, if you will. So I don't, anecdotally at least, couldn't say that someone is providing like unsafe, but I think that's a very fair question that
Yeah.
we could certainly see if Mrs. Reno has more historical data about, you know, anything like that. And certainly I'm also just thankful to all three contractors and all of our drivers for getting our students safely to and from on a daily basis. That's a big task.
Not even the prospect of being biased working for Door or anything, but like I was around a lot of Myers buses picking up at Liberty Valley, and fortunately or unfortunately, Wayne was in one of those buses a lot of times when there was like mass confusion for sporting events, or he has these buses on a field trip that are going to the high school, and like just looking at a perspective of it as a business and trying to coordinate all that stuff, like it might not look like a big deal to the people of like, hey, well, this bus can just go here and you just put this, like, you change one bus or one driver or one, and it's like a cluster. Like that's all it takes. And there were so many times that he would be driving bus 31 and he's like, oh, I had to switch drivers. I'm like ready to pull his hair out. Like, I don't know where this person is. I don't know how I'm going to do it. It's like, I don't know.
Right.
But like in the aspect of like the band and the field trips and stuff, like, I mean, I know working for Durrell, they're like, you need 6 buses for the band. There'll be the same 6 buses every trip. 9 times out of 10, the same 6 drivers every trip. Like it won't ever be, you know what I mean? Just not even the basis of, you know, just the I would say the operation as a whole, the size of the operation as a whole, you know what I mean? Like, of course, Fishing Creek has 30 buses to choose from and 60 drivers to choose from, you know what I mean? So it's easier for them if they get in a situation, but like as the operation as a whole, like being smaller, it's, you know, these are the 6 buses you're going to get because these are the 6 buses that we have. So, I mean, just in that aspect, it's, I don't know, it's on a business side of things, it's a lot different than just the coordination of things.
Did a survey in our group of drivers, and I think we come up with, what, 7 that want to do this? So they're very dependable. So we come up with about 6 or 7. Wasn't including you or I. No, it wasn't including any of the 3 of us.
Was it me?
So we're always
Oh.
available in the middle of the day between morning and night. If you need 2 buses to go, I don't know, to go to the one of them farms where they go, or wherever. There's always 3 of us sitting there. If they couldn't go, we can go because we sat there. We're about as reliable as you're going to get sitting right there in town. That's the only thing about that. As
I
we
wasn't
asked them
included.
before we even presented this, that they were interested.
He said
And
good
I've
driver.
got 5 or
Yeah.
6 I know of just.
I said help one and not good
It's
help
helpful
one.
to know that there are people to back up the offer that, you know.
Yeah, because we got 3 people that don't have a choice. We just have to go. That's the choice we'd have. Close the
I
doors,
like
let's
that.
go.
Guess I'm
That's the
due.
only choice we'd have. And that's why I feel that we're pretty safe with having 2, 3 buses at one time ever have to go out. We've got, somebody's gonna drive them, if it's us 3. It's the only thing I got going for that. I can pretty much assure that would happen.
Well, why don't we give people some time to digest a little bit, and we can circle back to this. I mean, there can't be any public deliberation once we leave this room. I mean, group deliberation once we leave this room. But if you have any specific thoughts on any of these topics, you can let me know individually. Right? And then we'll come up with something for the next agenda.
We can certainly look at any kind of data in the realm of customer service that might.
Yeah, I'd be interested
Might be
if there's
attainable.
anything else that we hang on to.
Yeah, we'll certainly talk with Mrs. Reno and see if there's other information, and we'll collectively get that out. In terms of like longer-term safety things we may not be aware of, or we at least get like a parent complaint that would be anecdotal, but we can at least see arrival times in buildings to know if anybody's consistently late. Because ultimately, when you're talking about someone being late, we'd see that on our end in terms of arrival to school.
Well, I have to say I'm relatively lucky because we have some degree of flexibility surrounding when my kids waiting there 20 minutes and don't know if the bus is going to come.
Sure, that's frustrating, I'm
I've
sure.
been on the phone with Laura Reno more this year than I had any other year. So.
We at one time had field trips, didn't we, Drew?
Yes.
And we never
Sir.
missed them.
That's great.
I know we done them for a year or so. Never missed one. We always had people just waiting to go. I want this one today. I want this one today. Okay. Have at it.
All right, some food for thought. 23-24 fiscal year.
Sure why it says that, sorry, but that maybe is a misprint somehow. We don't actually have an item for that, but we do have an add-on item, so we can pretend that 4.8 says food service.
Service and adult breakfast.
So
price.
this, we just got this information, that the minimum for adult pricing from USDA has to be $285, and we approved pricing where it was $250. So at the next board meeting, we'll ask that we adjust just that price, but the rest of food pricing would stay the same. Breakfast does remain free for children, like for our students. So this is just like a staff member buying breakfast price.
So long-range planning agenda, so 5.1 review of the bids. I mean, do you want me to say something briefly about that? Is that helpful? Or?
Sure, I had just noted, Mr. Ryan, if you move ahead, just that we held a meeting and we have scheduled them for the 12th, but certainly if you want to speak
Perfect.
about what we
No,
did
that's it.
there. Okay.
And I didn't hear anything else, so I assume everyone is okay with those three. I mean, those two presented, right?
Yes, and so all board members do have some information for Murata, Maine, and Alloway 5 in their packets, and representatives from those companies will be coming on the 12th to do a presentation, so then we could make an informed decision about, as a board, about which direction we'd like to go.
And I made a few calls outside of district who've dealt with these two companies in the past. Relatively pleased with the interactions. So I think for the long-range planning, this seems to probably be the right choice.
Are we to make a decision at the next meeting about this, or we're just, okay?
and then we can make
Not going to be a voting
a
specific?
vote in July.
Yeah,
So we
gotcha.
can
Yep.
use the 12th as discussion.
Yeah,
And then have further discussion at the committee of the
the
Yeah.
whole
whole
in
and then-
July
Yep.
Right.
before making a very well-informed, well-thought-out, deliberate
Right.
choice.
So there were some substantial differences between some of the. Notice the people who are there are chuckling. Like orders of magnitude difference in costs for unclear additional product.
right.
And these two companies seem to be much more anchored in the local area in various fashions. And they both seem to have a history of working with local school districts and having a reasonable amount of success. And the few areas that we seem to have sussed out that there have been issues, it primarily wasn't an issue with them, it was an issue with others. So this seems like the two that'll, are most likely, well, to both meet our needs in a reasonable price. And the difference in the price between these two is relatively small.
And they will certainly be open to questions, so that's why I wanted you to have the materials.
Yep.
So if those materials themselves helped you prepare questions for next week, or obviously things that you just in general would want to know, there will be representatives from both companies.
So the one thing I looked at, I mean, you shared with the committee the previous feasibility study with
Yes.
the KCBA. And we were interested in a new enrollment study. How feasible is it to get the enrollment study like 2 years later?
Like,
Since we have projections already.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I think there could certainly be differences there because one economic impact in a region can have an impact on enrollment. And when you're talking about a relatively small school district, I mean, I know not everybody believes Danville is a relative, but compared to one impact could have a major difference. And so right now there's actually some restructuring right down the street that could certainly be something that could have an impact on enrollment in the future here. So, because 50 students
is a couple
is
classes. right.
actually,
Yeah.
for us, is actually a big deal when you think about basic ed funding that is tied to enrollment, and is a huge portion of our revenue. Those types of things, loss of industry, and I certainly would not be aware of all of the economic job impact, indicators that would play into that. So I think that one was done, I believe, in 21.
I think so.
So we would be asking for them to do that several years out from whenever it is they're actually completing that. So I don't know.
Yeah, because I think that study went out to 28, I believe.
Went out to 28.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would ask for probably somewhere in the 7 to 10 year range.
I thought it was all in one.
So
Right, path to the DAC.
We're gonna go back. I was wrong. 4.8 was supposed to be there.
Okay.
I somehow there was some miscommunication, so I apologize. But similar to kind of transferring of funds, this item was about we're not necessarily anticipating a surplus for 23-24. It may just be slight if we have one, but we would ask, like, this is the time of year that we'd ask for that to be moved to cap reserve should we have one, like when we close out the year. So that would be a voting item in June, and I apologize for that miscommunication.
It's okay.
We can adjust to buildings and grounds then, and the first item there was a path to the DAC. And Jarl, I think you talked about this. We do have a lot of students that walk there, so we did bring this up in our monthly safety meeting. And there's a very clear path to the DAC if you go down the steps of the stadium and literally just walk directly across. So we have a gate at the top of the steps, and we have a gate on the other side of the stadium there. So and our middle school students can all take buses to the high school, like the way that they're run, like if they were going to go to the DAC. So middle school and high school students could both take that path to the DAC, and they would cross McCarty Lane, like further down away from the actual DAC entrance. So in terms of a spot to cross the road, that's probably about as safe as like a crossing spot would be. So what we'd like to look at this summer is just making sure those gates are always unlocked, like on a daily basis for after school, and working on signage. So like a middle school kid who's not usually like at the stadium could follow the like go to the DAC this way kind of signage, and we could get the word out to our families that that is an option for safe travel to the DAC. And our next item is our ag room update, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Moser for that.
yeah, so I know Mr. George was working on this with the company. This is set to the ag room project. There was a safety concern, if you recall, from a couple of months ago. The company is planning on coming in. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. George. June 10th. June 10th, they will be on site to do the work, to do the job, and it's going to be under $10,000. Yeah, so a lot cheaper than we had braced for. We braced for a major expense, which worked out in our favor because then it was great news when you hear that it's going to cost under $8 even. So thank you to Mr. George and maintenance for kind of diving into that when it was brought to our attention, and kind of very quickly getting it in line to have that work done very early here in the summer. Be a major upgrade.
Storm damage update?
And so I'm going to turn it over to Mr. George in just a minute, but I first of all just want to shout out Mr. George and his team in maintenance for just their quick action in getting repairs to this already started, and their quick action that day of the flood. We have a series of pictures, and he can kind of walk you through those pictures and what's going on. Another really large shout out to Mr. George is just the savings that he's had within his budget this year will allow any repair costs from the storm damage to just come directly out of the buildings and grounds budget without us going over budget this year. So really thankful for that as well. But he can tell you a little story and pictures here.
Forgive me, it's the first time I've done this. Is this okay, I can't hear. The first picture you see there, we had just we literally had just discovered it about an hour beforehand. And first thing we did, obviously, is, cordon it off. And I got to give a shout out to my guys. The guy that takes care of the grass, he found it, came right to me. We jumped on it right away. At this point in time on the first picture, it's about 10 feet wide, 20 feet from the hole closest to the edge closest to the pond back. And at that time, it was approximately 12 feet deep. The middle picture you see there is actually how high the water was. That pipe that you see sticking out, there's a 2-foot cap on top of that, and I'm sorry, a 1-foot cap on top of that. That's 2 feet sticking out of the water and a 1-foot cap. That pipe is 6 foot tall. So, and if you look to the left-hand side up there, just at the base of the trees, you'll see the water pouring down. That water started over here, beside us in that first retention pond. There's another one just below it, another small one below there, a big one, another small one, and then it hits that and goes down into the lower property. 3 inches of rain.
In like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Right.
So, do you have any of the other pictures?
Yes, if you go to the next slide,
Is
Mr. Ryan,
there
you'll
the
see it
video?
you'll see it continue. There you go.
Okay, this is the work being done. I got to give a shout out to ELA Sports. They worked on the bottom of that basin when the stadium turf was put in. They didn't. All they did is level it out. But their architects, their engineers had all the calculations of what we had. So I got a hold of them. They jumped right on it. And they asked me, who do I suggest? And the best reputation of the people in the area that I know of was Donnie Bauer's company. Also the biggest crew around, where I figured he would have people. So they got together with Donnie Bauer, and they brought in their equipment last week. So literally dug it down. The pipe has been removed. What's left of it, it was galvanized corrugated. It was put in 20, 30 years ago. So what you see there on the right is the channel where the new pipe that will be going in. That's going to be a CPVC black pipe with shear collars. There'll be a new stand pipe going in the center of the drain pond. The borough held a meeting with our engineers last night. The engineers are on board with our engineers as far as how to fix the project. Now we're going to retroactively go back for permits. This was an emergency. We didn't have a choice.
Right.
Had that fully collapsed, that would have been an environmental disaster. It's bad enough as it was. Luckily, we still had enough backflow that it didn't just wipe everything out down below. So we are working with the town to get the approved permits and the design taken care of. So currently right now, if the water would overflow, that channel there would take it down to, you can't really see it, there's a riprap pool down at the very end where the pipe will eventually run into to disperse the water so it's not rushing everywhere. That it?
That's it. Thank you. Do you have an anticipated timeline?
They're going to start digging up at Geisinger for a project, and that's where they're going to get all the clay for this. So all the dirt that you see there did not get hauled out. I saved all that dirt. That, number one, it saves us hauling fee. Number two, we're always looking for topsoil and dirt around here. So I've got a nice big dirt pile now. So,
Thank you. And we obviously
yeah.
have it appropriately, cordoned off. We had, when students were here, communicated with our staff about it's kind of in an area we don't regularly go to anyway, but our athletic coaches, things like that. And we've communicated with the community center because they started their day camp today, and we allow them to go in our nature center and our track and all of those things with students. So we've made sure they're aware that there's a construction zone as well.
With any luck, Bowers will have in stock or easily available what we need to finish this project. If they have it in stock or it's something that they can just pull off a shelf somewhere, you got about 3 days to finish up. So right now we're just on hold. Number one, we need clay, and we need the final drawing from the architect. That's all we're waiting on.
Anyone have any questions? Great, thank you. On to athletics and extracurricular, scoreboard update.
So a couple weeks ago, we were able to have a demo from Daktronics, visit the setup at the middle school, behind the middle school in the open field there, and had a demo done. Several board members were there. There was a junior high girls soccer team that got to also participate in seeing it. They were very excited. But we did get updated quotes. If you recall, last year we had some quotes that were provided to us, but these just recently came in. A 9-foot, 3-inch by 25-foot scoreboard, which is slightly bigger than the demo that was down there, from my understanding. It was quoted to us at $244,000, and a 17-foot by 32-foot was quoted to us at $415,677. Both of those prices came down from last year when we received quotes. Not insignificantly, quite frankly, probably in the anywhere from $50,000 to $70,000 range. So as we move forward,
compared to what we have and what other people have now. I mean, I kind of knew what to expect, but I didn't know what to expect. And I mean, at a high school level, it's definitely, it's definitely impressive for what it is. Being the cost of it, I mean, I believe that, as a whole, it's worth the money if people are going to buy it. But yeah, it was definitely a neat operation for the high school and school level kids to, be able to have that kind of, create that kind of atmosphere for them, I should say.
Yeah, there's definitely big possibilities with it. I mean, it's exceptional equipment. Would definitely be a nice thing to have. It's figuring out those costs and the how that looks.
I'll piggyback off of what they said. It was great. It's a very nice piece of equipment. I'm a big backer of the fact that we could build a curriculum based off of it, which was one of the selling points that Daktronics had. I think that'd be a great tool for like an audio video club or some kind of curriculum based around it. Have the students do the things that could appear on the screen and things like that. I'm more in favor of it if we can get it paid for. Because again, we're always in the public eye as far as how we spend their money. And when you go and ask them for more, and then a scoreboard gets built, John Q's first thing's going to be, oh, well, yeah, you raised my taxes to build a scoreboard. I get it now. And that's not the impression that we want to give people. So, and Mr. Moser, you and I have talked about this in several different conversations we had. I think, if this is something we decide to go forward with, that we need to have a very transparent plan in place of what we're getting from sponsors, what we have available to use, so we can kind of quiet that conversation.
just through if we are to go down that road, Daktronics does offer the support in terms of lining up those ads without any cost to them. The only, obviously, the conflict that's coming up is we are also looking at establishing and getting moving on a capital campaign. And so you don't want to go too far down the road of asking people for money and then turning around and 2 years later asking them again. But I think it would be interesting to, I personally, I looked at that screen that was down there, and that's in the 240 range. Like, to me, that is a lot more palatable than a $500,000 range, and probably offers a pretty
Plenty of-
significant upgrade to what is currently there, and some revenue generating opportunities, not to mention some fantastic school culture things that can be done. So it would be, we could begin furthering conversations. I don't know if there's anybody who says, no, we'd want, if we're going to look at it, we want to look at the massive 17-foot by 32-foot screen, which is even a lot bigger than what was down there, quite frankly. And I think one of the interesting things is, I think the one thing that most people would agree upon, whether they agree on a scoreboard or not, would be that the sound system down there is in desperate need of an upgrade. And so we could certainly look at pricing that out, because I think if you're talking about total cost of a new purchase, which would include the sound, well, if you're looking at that and you're thinking about what an upgrade to the sound system would cost, you can almost logically subtract that from the total cost, and then set your mark at what do we need to generate in terms of commitments in order to go down that road. Does that make sense?
No, I understand.
If it's going to cost $75,000 for a new sound system alone, then, really, theoretically, you're taking that off the cost of 244, because that's money that that sound system definitely is a need down there.
One thing we also got to consider is also the life expectancy of the scoreboard that's down there now. I mean, we're at year 20 plus, and it's only expected to last 25.
I think it's only 10 years old.
It's only
You
10
sure?
years.
Knowledge that I've heard, it's only about 10 years old.
I was told
Am I
it was
right or wrong
20.
on that, Brian?
Is it?
Yeah, it's not that old.
And you're
And what's
concerned,
the life expectancy of this one?
I think that just begs the very simple question that we have to answer. Do we need it? I mean, I am I was a college athlete. I've played every sport I could ever play. I still do. And we are, again, ultimately stewards of our citizens' money. And so, and I don't have a particularly strong opinion about it, because I don't think I know all the ins and outs well enough to say we don't need it. But I think that's, at a very simple, basic level, that's the question that we have to ask. And I don't think I have heard a lot of data to support that. Certainly the sound system is one thing, but and I understand the math that you're talking about, but that's a different way of looking at math, right? Because it's like 75,000 to fix it is 75,000 to fix it. Mm-hmm. So, you're adding whatever else on top of that, even if you do get a new sound system. So 175 and one is, 240. But like I said, I don't have a strong opinion. I just want to make sure that if we're going to use the taxpayers' money, that we're using it in a way that we're addressing a need that impacts our students.
One thing so Daktronics does offer, this was talked about earlier, if we were to go down the road of exploring that, we have an opportunity to explore ways to actually fund this.
Yeah.
That give us a year with no commitment.
Yeah.
So if we are able to line up the revenue that would offset or pay for essentially those costs, those commitments, that is one way that it could end up truly costing taxpayers nothing up front, if we were to say that. If we were to say, we need to see 100% of it funded before we were to agree, we could explore that route.
Right.
Or if we said 75% and we were going to, pay for the sound system, whatever it might be, because we were going to do that
Yeah.
anyway, or whatever arrangement we end up landing on, we could explore that 1-year contract where we sign and basically say, all we're committing to is that we won't go with somebody else in that time frame. We're not committing any funds.
Yeah.
If at the end of a year they haven't helped us or we haven't managed to raise those funds, we walk away and we don't spend a dime.
And I think that that playing devil's advocate, the question that arises then is, let's say we do a year commitment to raise money for the scoreboard, we could do the same thing for something else.
Yeah.
That could have a direct benefit to,
Starting point.
so I don't know. And you mentioned the capital campaign too. It's like that's a very real consideration. If we're asking for money from the community, we need to be able to really clearly demonstrate both to the citizens but also to the contributors that it is something that's going to have a direct impact on student programming and growth and that is my personal opinion. Not saying that there is not, the idea of a curriculum around the scoreboard, that's a really cool concept. But that's going to be a handful of kids. So,
Unfortunately, the scoreboard's it's just like any other piece of mechanical equipment. It's perishable at a very high cost to
Yeah.
replace it, no matter what you do, how you do it, how big it is, whatever. And my personal, the backlash you're going to get from the community 9 times out of 10 is probably going to be people that are never going to attend anything to see the scoreboard. They're just going to complain about the cost of it. And 2, people that aren't, I think you're going to get complaints from people up front, no matter how you do it, how you look at it, whatever. But even as me, like, I was 110% not for it in the beginning, and then going down there and seeing it and, like, actually being involved in that was like, oh, okay, like, it's pretty cool. Like, it's simply, it sells itself when you see it. Is it necessary for something that big and fancy? Absolutely not. Is it nice to have something that big and fancy? Absolutely. So you're going to get, it's like anything, you're going to get backlash, but like he said, it's, is it something we need right now? No, but it's also not waiting till your car has 300,000 miles on it and it leaves you sit along the road. You can't, you know what I mean? It's eventually something's going to have to happen. It's in any aspect, big, expensive, small, something's going to have to happen eventually. Now, I don't know, but it's something that's going to need to be done in the future, no matter how you look at it.
Well, I guess it would be nice to have some degree of consensus on how we want to move forward with this. For me, it really is a needs versus wants thing, and my major concern is if we're also starting a capital campaign, like, what are we taking away from in the context of the capital campaign in order to do this if we can't be funded in other fashions? And the issue is, even if we go with them and ask them to raise 100% of the money, they're oftentimes going to be asking at least to some degree the same degree of the donors that we'll be asking for the capital campaign. So if you're telling me we're going to use the capital campaign to do something beneficial at the middle school, right, or whatever it is, something structural, or then it really becomes a question of, can I get another 5 years out of that scoreboard so I can do these other things? And so I guess the question is, as a group, not looking for an actual vote, but we need to provide some direction as to what we'd like to do next. And I'll be very honest, from my perspective, I don't find it nearly as palatable, the idea of spending $275,000 in a year where I'm already asking people to raise their taxes. When we don't need the scoreboard this minute, even though I get the analogy of, replacing the car before it breaks down on the side of the road, there's also other concerns here. Right?
Yeah, I don't foresee, in the next 5-10 years, I don't foresee anything happening to the operation that's already there that's going to cost $240,000 in repairs.
No.
You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, you might have to do something to it in the next 5 or 10 years, but you're not going to spend $240,000 fixing it in the next 5 or 10 years. So.
Yeah. I mean, I like the idea of getting a new car, but I'm not running out of money. I mean, that's the honest truth.
Yeah,
Not,
yeah, it's
not
like-
in this economy and
yeah.
not with what I'm doing.
It's
right?
like buying a new car because you have a bad ball joint. Like you're not. That's not.
No,
you know.
I'm,
It's
I'm going to pay the $1,000 to get
Yeah,
the ball joint replaced
yeah.
instead of the $70,000 on a new
Yep.
car. So I guess I'm looking for some sort of direction and consensus.
Have we ever priced sound systems?
Not specifically. We got ballpark, kind of just talked around and asked
Other
around.
than the company we have now that we're not happy with?
I say the 75 was like ballpark, not official, like we're
Yeah.
going out for quotes, but that was ballpark information we've gotten.
I mean, because I've been there obviously with the youth football program. Carrie, you spent many a Friday nights there,
Yes.
and that sound system is terrible.
Yep.
Yes, it is terrible.
So it sounds like that is a need,
Yeah.
Yes.
which is different than the one. And
That,
so
that also has the cost of us renting a system for graduation, which will be a repeated cost because the sound system, like we can't have a graduation speech off
Where you
of the
can't
sound
hear
system.
anything.
So we do have like a company coming in tomorrow to set up equipment to do that for graduation.
And I think what a lot of people are forgetting, once this is paid off or whatever, that revenue that's coming in from those sponsors is full revenue that will go towards our budget also. So, I mean, depending on what sponsorships we have throughout up to 5 years or whatever the agreement is, that money is going in towards the budget.
Do you have any idea roughly what the cost of renting the sound system, what that looks like?
Lee,
That's
how
about
much is that a year?
10,000, I think. For it's like we get there is a part of that we probably would have to do with a screen, but the majority of that is the sound system. So maybe 8 of the 10 is a sound system cost for us right now. for
Yearly.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not worth it to rent. I mean, it's
I'm just wondering if does anybody know of any school districts out there that have alternative sources of funding other than the usual? For example, I had mentioned about a service club. Now, I don't know, I know there's some service clubs, they started one over in, it was Lewisburg, maybe Shikellamy. So my thought is, I don't know how much, funding that would bring in, but if you have property and you have a home, you have things that need to be done. And there's a tremendous amount of manpower here, girl power, boy power, that can be utilized to do things for people or their properties and their homes with or without supervision, depending on how much it would require. I brought this up before. I think it would be good all the way around. I think there is potential for bringing in some funding, and it would be, if something was done for someone, it would just be a goodwill offering. In other words, you wouldn't say, we're gonna come in and do this for X amount of dollars. It would be, it can be discussed, and if they wanted to contribute, if they wanted to give something, and most people would, because they know how much it is, how much it costs to get a carpenter, a plumber, a gardener, whatever. So it would be good in many ways. It would be good for the school, and people would see that students are helping out in the community, and I think there would be volunteers to help out. I would certainly be one of them. If there was anything that would be required in terms of expertise or equipment or whatever. So I don't know if that's viable. I don't know if it's done anywhere else, but I think it should be considered, because I think there's a lot of pluses in every aspect of that.
I
But
mean,
I think it's something that should be considered.
it sounds like an interesting idea, but I can tell you that we can't have high school and middle school students doing unlicensed plumbing and construction work. So that would violate not only child labor laws, but it would actually end up violating, I think, several licensing set of laws. So there's a relatively limited scope that we could do.
What would be the age? High school students? I'm not talking about young kids, I'm talking about high school students.
Yeah, but there's still work restrictions and there's licensing restrictions.
Well, I don't know, I mean, that would be legal, you'd have to find out.
So students would have to file working papers. I think my concern is really kind of liability concerns in terms of like student safety when they're in these places, and so we'd have some insurance ramifications. I also would just have pretty significant concerns about the safety of the people that would be inviting us into their homes. There's extremely strict requirements for any volunteer in our schools. Like any volunteer even has to be fingerprinted to come into our schools. So we'd have to require any person we interacted with, if we were pulling weeds in their yard to doing whatever that was, we'd have to require that person to go through many steps of clearances, and there's even a cost to that. So like our parents, if they go on a field trip right now, have multiple steps they have to take that's just a requirement of PDE.
I talked to legal about it, there's a possibility of just having a legal form that people would sign and say, there's no liability here. Whether that would work or not, I don't know. But I mean, if there are service clubs out there, and there are, they must have gone through those things.
Locally, the only service clubs I'm aware of are going through an established nonprofit organization, like going through like a Good Samaritan or something like that, and they're not directly going into anyone's home. So they're going to like the Good Samaritan organization and like preparing food backpacks or something that is a service to the community, but they wouldn't be in like the Smith household or something like that, since we wouldn't know the background of the people in that household, and we wouldn't want there to be any sort of child abuse risk there for us.
They're certainly not doing construction or plumbing, which incurs liability and also has state licensing requirements.
Correct.
Jason, quick question. What were the costs on the 2 scoreboards?
The 9 foot by 3 by 25 feet was $244,000, and then the 17 foot by 32 foot was $416,000, give or take 300.
And the $70,000 estimate for a sound system?
That's a very ballpark.
Correct.
Anecdotal.
We haven't investigated. We haven't asked
Correct.
multiple sources. Okay. Just wanted to clarify.
And then you're at, the other is the $10,000 to $12,000 a year of rentals for a screen and sound system.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to the question to the group. Like if we're going to move forward in any way, shape, or form, or remove it off the table, the question becomes, what is the sort of thing that you want to put before you guys?
I think we have a lot of other things need answered first.
Do you want further investigation?
Well, not so much into the scoreboard. I think we have a pretty good handle on what that looks like at this point.
Okay.
But, we have that property across the road. What are we doing? A lot of talk about some buildings that need issues. I don't think we can, until we know a plan of some sort there, like a time frame. What are we doing with that land? We need to figure out where to spend our money.
Okay.
First, I think.
So what I'm hearing.
Kind of a priority.
So what I'm hearing for you is that no advancement of this at this moment, but put it on as an item for committee of the whole to rediscuss as we get more.
My opinion.
Okay, other thoughts?
Can we get bids on the sound? Quotes on the sound system, sorry.
Yep.
Because again, if theoretically it is a $75,000 investment in 7 years of renting, recouped what we were going to spend anyway.
Well, also, if you end up extending the life cycle of this current board and you're looking at 5 to 7 years, those two things match up if you decide to do that. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but just thinking theoretically.
Yeah.
I guess the one thing that I would want to see before I ask if there's additional is, since we're starting to talk about the idea of a capital campaign, what are we thinking about doing with funding for the capital campaign? Because that would influence, from my perspective, so we need to start to think about what would be useful to the district itself. So are the fields across the way, development of those fields, something for the capital campaign? And then it becomes a question of, would we rather develop those into something usable, or would we rather have a new scoreboard? Right?
And timing-wise, right, the long-range planning process and a feasibility study
just
is going to tell us a lot
That's
about
gonna tell
what
us
our
what-
needs actually are.
Like
there's,
that campaign is married to the long-range planning, really. Like, as we make decisions, then that becomes what our ask is.
That makes
Whether
sense.
it's a field project or a building project or
Yeah,
both.
if
or-
you're putting more athletic fields in that you're going to play games on, not just practice fields, like
Sure.
potentially soccer, lacrosse, whatever, who knows? You're going to need a scoreboard.
Yeah. You're gonna have needs
that
on
you
that
don't
side.
have.
Right.
You know, which could potentially mean move that scoreboard, relocate it, and put. You know what I mean? There's a lot of different
Right,
things.
the money, the things that you figure out through long-range planning, it's not like let's not do, these could be for other athletics, right? It could
Yeah.
be for athletics that we would want to allocate that money, and then why not have a better idea, which is what I think, I agree with what you're saying. We need to understand all the variables at play before we're making a significant purchase, particularly if it could have an impact down the road.
So I'm hearing more with the idea of tabling and periodically revisiting it. I'm seeing nodding heads, even though
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to count votes. That's what it sort of sounds like.
Okay.
Any thoughts from the far side of the table that is remarkably quiet?
My thought's always been the same thought, still gonna be the same thought. When you can prove to me you've got money to fund that scoreboard up front, not behind the scene,
Yeah,
I'm interested till then I'm out.
okay. You know, the
Yeah,
only,
no, I am.
the only logistic issue with that is if you commit to going down that pathway,
Then you have to buy it.
you're probably interfering with whatever the capital campaign would already be, so that's the one piece.
Yeah.
So you have to be, if you decide to go down that pathway, you have to be very deliberate, that's where you're gonna want any local donations to be going, right? And that there aren't other needs, so we just have to be thoughtful about that.
Yep.
And-
Okay, so it sounds like,
We'll get some sound system information and we'll continue to kind of put it on the back burner till everyone says they want to
right,
revisit that.
and so as long-range planning continues to develop, I mean, that's interesting, because if you end up needing a scoreboard on the opposite side, and you can end up fixing the sound system, then it starts to make a whole lot more sense to utilize
I mean,
that.
I don't know if that's a possibility, but it's
I mean, with enough money, anything's
yeah.
possible.
you
I was
got-
saying, there's a lot of things that are technically possible
I
right
am
now.
familiar with projects where they have relocated
Created
scoreboards.
Sure.
The score,
But that also makes it much more palatable to spend money to purchase something in there, because you're enabling a whole another group of sports to be able to play on.
Right,
the
and then there's a
field.
need, there's a clear need.
Clear need,
Yeah.
right.
the,
Okay,
score,
that
the
makes sense.
scoreboard at the
And-
T-Railer field is one of Bloomsburg's old scoreboards.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's kinda
Okay.
cool.
Yeah.
And just to throw in my 2 cents before we move on, if we do make playable fields over there, would that open us up to opportunities to hold tournaments and
I mean, potentially.
certainly
could
and things
open
like
up a
that,
lot of
as long as
things.
they're
Some
like
revenue
PIAA
sources in
approved
that.
fields? So again,
Pretty
that
great.
could also be a revenue generator.
You make
Sure.
revenue then.
Make money for a scoreboard.
Love it when a plan comes together.
And I would just want to note, we did talk about the rental system for outside. I would want to name that we also, if graduation's inside, there are rental costs there. So we did move graduation outside so that people wouldn't have to have tickets and like whole families could come to graduation. But an inside graduation does require tickets, but it also requires a rental of a sound. Although our sound system is better inside than it is outside, it's not good enough for people on like the top row of the upper deck to like hear a speech. So even an indoor graduation does require sound system rental. Our next item is Athletic Hall of Fame, and we did have another person express interest.
Very quick update. Yeah, somebody did finalize an application, so we'll be bringing that name for approval at next week's board meeting.
How close are we to actually getting our first class inducted?
I would hope that we have a full Hall of Fame committee by sometime this summer, so that we are essentially then starting the process as outlined originally, that it's kind of a late summer, fall nomination, winter for review, spring, and, yeah, go through that process.
How many are left? How many spots,
I-
committee members do we need?
I think we will still need,
If we approve them one.
yeah, if we
next-
approve the one next week, oh gosh, I believe it's still 3 more.
And we've advertised, right?
Yes, several times. So if anybody knows anybody who is not employed by the district in any capacity, or I'm sorry, as a coach, and is interested in serving on the committee, please extend that invitation to, they can directly reach out to me and I will do everything I need to walk them through that process.
Great.
You can even give them my cell phone number.
I need to wrap this up.
Give that out on a regular basis anyways.
That's where they're coming from.
Call this guy.
The fall play for the middle school, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
So you'll see the high school winter musical, Anything Goes, was approved last month. And the high school and the middle school are both interested in adding an additional play for next year. We've had great interest in our drama clubs, great success in both of our drama clubs, and they've also raised tons of funds in ticket sales. So we went from a few years ago, the middle school club having a couple $100 to like start a production to bringing in like $10,000 this year with their production. So really growing organizations. So kudos to our advisors there. But we'll be looking at the meeting on the 12th to have approval for the fall play for the high school called The Play That Goes Wrong High School Edition, and for the middle school a fall play of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and a spring play of Persephone. So looking for that approval. Excited for those directors and students.
June personnel updates.
Then on the June agenda, I have certainly been sharing these updates and invites with board members for when we were holding interviews and resumes and those things, but we will have 2 English and social studies certified middle school teachers up for approval next week. We had 16 English applicants and 14 social studies applicants and 4 dual certifications that applied for that. We had 12 total people interviewed in that process and had a unanimous decision from our selection committee to make an offer to the 2 people for those open slots, and that was our selection committee. We also will be recommending 2 special education teachers for hire. Really excited. We had 8 applicants and 6 interviewed, and we really had a strong group interviewed. And if there was something I would say we're seeing statewide and specifically in this area that there's more of a shortage of, I would say that it's special education. So we were excited to have a strong pool there. And so we'll be recommending 2 people from that pool, and that was our selection committee. And we'll also be recommending 2 high school secretaries. And we had 4 applicants and interviewed all 4 of those people to select those 2 secretaries.
And I just want to actually thank Anna for a very nice article on the Danville School District and the fact that we're having 0 recruiting problems. As an exception compared to many other districts in the IU, that we're doing quite well in the number of people that are interested in working in the district. So despite some of the talk that a large number of people leaving, we have even
And we're certainly getting some high caliber, like recent college grads, but we're definitely getting a lot of regional interest for people choosing to make, like that are coming to us with some really solid experience and wanting to make Danville home. So we're excited about that and feel proud of all the candidates we'll be recommending next month.
9-1, board concerns and items for the next meeting.
I got one. Have we received any information on like a safety survey from DOT about the possible news of what's going across the street?
Have not. I don't have any particular details.
Okay. Is there a way that we could?
I will get in
Try
touch
to
with the
get
borough and see if
in touch.
I can get some additional information. Yep.
Which thing? I'm missing.
So there's a
Wawa.
Wawa.
Oh,
I mean, the
Wawa.
subs are great,
And a
but
fast-
like it will add traffic.
That will add a lot of.
In a
traffic.
fast food restaurant,
Yes.
they're talking about adding a crosswalk right across Route 11.
Oh, nice. I knew there was
for
talk about the Wawa coming in, but I didn't.
Children and
pay
everything,
too much
so
attention to it. Interesting.
yeah. It
Will
would-
certainly impact traffic.
It's
and-
going to impact traffic, and especially if you're going to have kids walking across Route 11 there too now. Yeah,
That's what you need.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Fully caged in. Fully caged in.
Yeah,
You
heat
can
and
tell
everything,
Tyler has a lot of it. Tyler
Well-
has experience with children.
Well, I mean,
I don't wanna be cold across the
this
street.
kind of
I want
ties
the heat
into
on.
the long range too,
Sure.
because if we're putting fields across
I
the
would say
street.
that for sure is an issue we're
I
gonna
mean,
have to
you're
think
gonna-
about, is that crossing to
Yeah.
the fields.
Absolutely.
I completely agree.
Yeah, I have a concern. In today's press enterprise, there was pictures of graduates, honor graduates for the schools. And traditionally, and I've never seen it done this way before, but, you know, they usually have either the son or the daughter of so-and-so. But for the Danville honor graduates, it said child of. And I don't understand why they use that term rather than son of or daughter of. A child refers to someone pre-puberty, and these are seniors. So I don't understand the change. I don't understand why, and it's just curious to me.
I think we maybe would need to ask the newspaper how that was presented. I'm not sure. But I
I'm
don't
just curious
think
where
that
where it came from and why is it, I mean, that was the first time I've ever seen that. And all the other schools are, you know, daughter of or son of rather than child of.
and perhaps we provided that information, I don't know, but there wasn't any specific thought behind that. So I genuinely am not sure who provided that information, but there was no certainly orchestrated thought around that.
10-1, public comment. Seeing as how there's only the press here. Would you like to get up and talk in the
No.
mic? All right, we are going to adjourn to executive session to discuss personnel and other issues. Thank you. We're not coming back. Yeah, I need a pee too. Potty break first. John Vella just called me.
They're for you to take and look
I think it's probably about
That
7.
was